I was told this recording would never be transcribed, and I was told that even if it were, no one would be allowed to hear it. That alone should tell you what kind of thing this is, and why my hands are still shaking even now as I sit here and speak. My name is Ernest Treadwell, and what I am about to say is a confession that was never meant to leave my throat. I am making this recording decades after the fact, at 11:41 p.m. in a room with the lights off, because I learned a long time ago that light doesn't make you safer. It only makes you visible. The window behind me is covered, not because I'm afraid of being seen, but because I don't want to see my own reflection while I talk about this. Reflections have a way of remembering things you try very hard to forget. I need to start slow, slower than feels comfortable, because the truth is not something that can be approached quickly. It resists speed. It resists clarity, and if you move too fast, it notices. In 1988, I was still a federal ranger, and I still believed that paperwork mattered. I still believed that if something was written down properly, logged at the right time, signed by the right people, it could be controlled. I believed that rules were fences, and fences kept things where they belonged. That belief didn't survive the interview. I remember the exact moment the assignment reached my desk. It was 8:06 a.m., and the building was quiet in that early way that government offices get before the phones start ringing. My coffee had gone untouched, cooling beside my logbook, and the radio on the corner shelf was murmuring static between stations. I was not expecting anything unusual that day. That's important to understand. I was not prepared. The folder had no markings, no seal, no classification stamp. Just my name typed neatly on the front, the letters slightly misaligned as if the machine that printed them had hesitated. When I opened it, there was only one page inside. It told me where to go. It told me when to be there. And it told me very clearly that I was not to ask questions. I sat there for a long time, reading the page over and over again, not because it was complicated, but because it felt incomplete. There were no reasons, no context, just instructions laid out in a way that suggested they had been written by someone who already knew I would agree. I didn't touch my coffee. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I just listened to the building breathe around me, the faint hum of electricity in the walls, the distant sound of footsteps echoing down a corridor I couldn't see. With each passing minute, the sense that I was being waited on grew heavier. By 8:19 a.m., I realized something else. I had already decided to go. That realization scared me more than the assignment itself. The drive took most of the day. I won't describe the route in detail, not because I can't remember it, but because remembering it feels like retracing a path that was never meant to be walked twice. I will say this: the further I drove, the quieter the world became. Radios lost their signal. Road signs thinned out and then stopped altogether. Even the wind seemed to give up, as if whatever lay ahead had claimed the air for itself. I checked my watch often, too often. At 3:27 p.m., I realized I had been holding my breath without noticing. I let it out slowly, deliberately, and told myself that fear was just the body reacting to uncertainty. That explanation felt thin even as I thought it. By the time I reached the facility, the sun was already sinking low, staining the horizon with that dull, exhausted orange that comes right before night settles in for good. I parked the truck at 5:52 p.m. and stayed inside longer than necessary, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, counting the seconds between sounds. There was no sign on the building, no name, no indication that it existed for any reason a person might understand. It sat low against the earth, concrete pressed into sand and stone, as if it had been lowered there rather than built. The air around it felt heavier, denser, like breathing through damp cloth. When I finally opened the door and stepped out, the sound of it closing behind me echoed too long, lingering in the stillness. That was the first time I felt it. Not fear, not exactly. Pressure. A subtle change in the way the air rested against my skin, as if something nearby had shifted its attention. I stood there motionless, my hand still on the door handle, and waited for the sensation to pass. It didn't. It simply settled, patient, like a weight that had always been there and had only just made itself known. A guard met me at the entrance. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. His eyes avoided mine in a way I would later recognize as practiced. He checked my papers slowly, carefully, his fingers lingering on the page with my name. "You're expected," he said at 6:11 p.m., and nothing in his voice suggested that expectation was a good thing. Inside, the corridors were narrow and slightly uneven, the floors worn smooth by footsteps that had never been documented. The lights buzzed overhead, their rhythm inconsistent, creating pockets of shadow that seemed to resist illumination. Every door we passed was closed. Every lock we passed was engaged. We walked in silence for what felt like much longer than it could have been. I focused on my breathing, on the sound of my boots against the floor, on anything that kept my thoughts from drifting too far ahead. Anticipation, I had learned, was often worse than reality. At 6:39 p.m., we stopped in front of a door that looked no different from the others. The guard hesitated, just for a moment. His hand hovered near the handle, fingers flexing as if he were working up the nerve to touch it. "This is where I leave you," he said finally. "You can come out when it's over." I asked him what he meant by over. He didn't answer. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt final in a way I can't properly explain. The lock engaged, metal sliding into metal, and I was alone in the interview room. The space was small, windowless. The table in the center was bolted to the floor, its surface scarred with scratches that caught the light at odd angles. Two chairs faced each other. One of them was heavier, reinforced in ways that suggested it had been designed to resist more than human strength. I did not sit down right away. I stood there listening. There was a sound in the room that took me a moment to identify. Not a noise exactly, more like the absence of one. A hollow, expectant quiet that pressed against my ears and made my own breathing feel intrusive. I became acutely aware of every movement I made, every shift of weight, every swallow. At 6:47 p.m. I sat down. I placed my recorder on the table with care, aligning it neatly with the edge, as if order might offer some small measure of protection. The red light came on, steady and unwavering. I stated my name. I stated the date. I stated the time. My voice sounded wrong to me, thinner, less certain. "I'm here to conduct an interview," I said, and immediately felt foolish for saying it out loud. The response did not come right away. Minutes passed. I know this because I watched the second hand on my watch crawl forward, each tick loud in my ears. I resisted the urge to look up. I had been told in no uncertain terms that eye contact was not necessary, that it was not advised. The pressure returned. It was subtle at first, a gentle tightening in my chest, a sense that the air had shifted slightly closer. Then it grew, spreading outward, filling the room without moving. I felt it settle across the table from me, not occupying the chair so much as acknowledging its position. When it spoke, it did not use words. It used recognition. Images surfaced in my mind uninvited. A trailhead at 7:03 a.m., fog clinging to the ground. The sound of something moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight. The way my radio had crackled and died when I tried to call it in. I felt these memories as vividly as if I were back there, standing in the cold, heart hammering. I realized with a growing sense of dread that these were not questions. They were confirmations. At 7:12 p.m., it finally made a sound. It inhaled. That is the only way I can describe it. The air shifted, drawn inward, and with it came a faint pressure change that made my ears pop. The sound that followed was almost, but not quite, human. A careful approximation, like someone repeating a language they had learned by listening rather than speaking. It said my name. Not aloud. Inside my head. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles whitening and focused on the grain of the wood, on the small imperfections that proved it was real. I reminded myself that I was there to listen, that this was my role. The interview stretched on. Questions were asked without words. Answers were taken without permission. Time behaved strangely, expanding and contracting in ways that made it impossible to track. When I checked my watch again, it was 8:04 p.m., though it felt like both minutes and hours had passed. At one point, it repeated a sentence I had spoken earlier using my voice. The cadence was wrong. The pauses were misplaced, but the tone was unmistakable. Hearing myself like that, echoed back with such precision and such indifference, made my stomach turn. It wasn't mimicking me. It was remembering me. By the time the pressure receded, by the time the awareness withdrew and left the room feeling suddenly, painfully empty, it was 9:01 p.m. The door unlocked on its own. I did not wait for an invitation. I gathered my recorder, my logbook, and stood on legs that felt unsteady beneath me. The guard did not meet my eyes as he led me back out. We did not speak. Outside, the night had fully settled, the stars sharp and distant overhead. I sat in my truck for a long time before turning the key, my hands trembling as I tried to write something, anything, in my logbook that would make sense of what had just happened. I left the facility at 9:34 p.m. and I did not look back. For years I told myself that was the end of it. I transferred. I took assignments that kept me indoors. I avoided places where the silence felt too attentive, where the air seemed to press in just a little too close. I built a life around the idea that some things, once encountered, could be left behind. That idea was a lie. Last month at 10:18 p.m., I found an envelope on my kitchen table when I came home. No return address, no indication of how it got there. Inside was a single sheet of paper, unmarked, the ink slightly faded. Written in my own handwriting were the words, "Do you remember me?" I am recording this now because I know what happens when you pretend not to. I know how patient it is, how willing to wait. And as I sit here in the dark, listening to the quiet stretch and settle around me, I can't help but wonder. If it remembers me so clearly, how long has it been remembering you?